Here we are in chapter 7, and this will be our second chapter in how to basically create a new company totally from scratch. The last chapter we focused on using the detailed start method. This chapter will focus on the express method. And just as with last chapter, there are no base company files to get you started. You'll be doing all of the data entry from scratch in this chapter as well. And so I'm going to just skip through some of these things. We're going to bring ourselves back to our familiar Open QuickBooks, and we'll set up a new company, and I will jump over and do that. We are at our initial screen where we've got no company open. Again, we can either go begin a new company from our file menu at the top, or we can use this little. So last week we focused on the detailed start process, and this week we will do the express start. And once again, we've got some basic information that we've got to enter in here, otherwise it's not going to let us get very far. I'll just do ABC company. Choose an industry, and I'm sure your book tells you what to do. Let's see. You should do whatever your book tells you to do. And so it's important to know what kind of entity you are. If you're not sure, you should definitely check with your accountant. But for simplicity's sake, we'll be a sole proprietor. I'm not going to go through and enter the address or anything, but you will want to do that. This is reminding me why I don't let these videos run while I do this. So this basically fast tracks us over a number of the steps that we did in the prior screen, or excuse me, the prior chapter. So we can either add all of our information at this point, or we can just start working. And we're going to skip the new feature tour. But as with the last chapter, we can go into our preference, and much of this chapter will be focused on working with a number of these preferences and setting up your initial settings. So there are a number of preference items, and this slide will talk about that. You can pause this if you want to read a little bit more about that. And we'll just skip through our quick check here. Account numbers. Now, hopefully you remember from Accounting 1 that our chart of accounts is a list of accounts, and those accounts not only have names, but they have numbers as well. By default, QuickBooks doesn't use the numbers. That's a feature that you have to activate. And so you would do that within the preferences window. Otherwise, it will just use the account names, not the names and numbers. And so this shows you how to do that. You would do that within the accounting tab on your preferences page. Inventory. Again, how you want to, some of the preferences for inventory can be addressed within this preferences section. Sales tax, and as we become more global or start working through e-commerce in many instances, you may have multiple sales tax categories for different, you might have local sales tax, you might have some states where you don't have sales tax at all, other states that you do, and as the trend seems to be moving toward e-commerce and the charging of sales tax, this is going to be something that you may have to modify on an ongoing basis as sales tax rates change in the various jurisdictions that you do business in. And so we're not going to talk a lot about payroll now. We will be getting into payroll pretty fairly in depth in later chapters, but this basically shows you how to disable the payroll feature if that's not something you're going to be using within QuickBooks. And I'm just going to you can read through these. And this is all about basically customizing, making things inactive, which we've talked about in prior chapters. Customizing some payment terms. We've got QuickBooks is going to come preloaded with your standard payment terms, but if you want to make some additional ones, you have the ability to do that within the payment terms list. And this slide goes through and talks about how to do that. Ignore the man walking behind me. The good-looking man walking behind me, as he adds. So updating the customer center, again, this is something we reviewed in chapter 3, so I won't spend a lot of time. Same thing with the vendor center, which we did in chapter 2. We want to do an interim report. And again, if we are not starting this company from scratch, but in fact we are transferring over from an existing company that we were doing under either a manual system, or maybe we're just using Excel or something like that, something that won't automatically import its data, we're going to want to make sure that we can check and that we haven't transposed a number, that our balances are what they were when we were using the other system. So we're going to want to make sure that we print out a profit and loss and compare that to the system that we've migrated our data from. And so we talked about the adjustment for the accrual basis in accounting in the last chapter. Same situation applies in this chapter. And so it's going to be your default for bookkeeping and record keeping for companies. You will have to do some adjustments, and these slides basically, again, I'm not going to go through and read them for you, but talk about the adjustments that you need to do to address the fact that you will be operating on an accrual-based system. And again, since we went through all of this in the last chapter, a lot of this is repetition. The thing that's important to remember about this week's homework, so for those of you who have continued to watch the video till this point, kudos to you. We have been doing homework based on Lynn's Music Studio, which were the first set of case problems in the back of each of the chapters. For this chapter, I wanted you to use the second case problem, Olivia's, and so that will be the topic of this week's homework, is Olivia's business. And backing up files, again, something, much of this is repetition. This is just a new way of doing things that we've already learned in other chapters. So hopefully some of this is just a way to solidify some of the concepts that you learned previously. And that concludes the Chapter 7 video lecture.